The park was filled with vibrant colors, the sound of children's laughter and the gentle noise of kites cutting through the sky. Among the trees, an older man with graying hair carried a basket full of balloons of all shapes and hues, each one tied with a colorful ribbon. The afternoon sun reflected off the balloons, creating a spectacle that delighted passers-by. With every sail, a smile appeared on his tired but kind face. Beside him, a little girl watched each transaction with bright, eager eyes. She was his granddaughter, who had been accompanying him in this simple yet magical work since she was very small. To her, those balloons weren't just toys. They were little stars you could hold in your hands. Her grandfather always said that when he sold a balloon, he wasn't just handing over air inside plastic, but dreams shaped by color. The girl believed this with all her heart. Customers would approach with smiles, carefully choosing between red hearts, funny animals, and twinkling balloons. Some bought them for their children, others just to remember their own childhood. The vendor treated every person with the same care, as if he were handing over something too precious to be taken for granted. This dedication won over everyone who came his way. The smell of popcorn mixed with the scent of flowers in the park, creating a light and welcoming atmosphere. Children ran around while parents watched from a distance, some laughing, others taking pictures on their phones. The park seemed like a small refuge of peace within the city's hustle and bustle, a place where life slowed down. The vendor took pride in his routine. Despite financial struggles, he never complained. To him, every balloon released into the sky was a reminder that dreams could fly. His granddaughter, sitting beside him, dreamed of having a balloon of her own, but she knew her grandfather needed to sell them all to put food on the table. Even so, just watching was enough to make her happy. Sharing knowing glances, the girl and her grandfather had little conversations. She would ask if one day they could tie all the balloons together and fly to the stars. He would smile, promising that maybe in their dreams it was possible. This simplicity strengthened the bond between them, creating their own private world of love and hope. Time passed slowly, as if the park were untouched by the pressures of the modern world. The vendor would get lost looking at the blue sky while holding firmly to the balloon swaying gently in the breeze. The scene seemed almost magical, like a living painting that no one would ever forget. The regulars at the park already knew the man. Many stopped by not just to buy, but to chat and listen to his stories. In a way, he was a beloved figure, a symbol of resilience and kindness amid the urban rush. His presence felt as natural as the birds singing at dusk. With her childlike purity, her grandfather saw her grandfather as a hero. To her, no famous business person or artist could compare to the man who, every single day, turned simple balloons into smiles. This admiration made her believe the world could be a kinder place if everyone were more like him. As the sun neared the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, the vendor adjusted his basket for another evening of work. He didn't know that this day held something unexpected. Amid the quiet wind and the park's joy, an encounter was coming that would change their lives forever.
Across town, in a luxurious penthouse, a young tech billionaire stared at his computer screen with fury. The meeting he had just finished had been a failure. Investors had questioned his decisions, and the feeling of absolute control seemed to be slipping through his fingers. For someone used to being in charge, it was unbearable. He was dressed impeccably in a custom-tailored suit, but his tired eyes betrayed many sleepless nights. Despite his wealth, there was an emptiness in his expression, as if every achievement was just another weight on his shoulders. He had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly fulfilled him. He decided to go for a walk. He needed to clear his head, to sort out his thoughts. He took his imported car and, with no destination in mind, let himself drift through the busy streets. The contrast between his life and that of the simple people he saw along the way didn't evoke any empathy in him. On the contrary, it reinforced his feeling of superiority. After parking near a public park, he decided to go in. He found it curious to observe how people amused themselves with such ordinary things. To him, happiness was an illusory concept, used only to justify a lack of ambition. He couldn't understand how anyone could be content with so little. The sound of children's laughter was almost irritating to him. It was as if they were mocking his seriousness, his life controlled by numbers and goals. He walked among the trees, trying to ignore the noise, until his gaze was drawn to a peculiar scene: an old man selling colorful balloons, surrounded by enchanted children. For a moment, a distant memory surfaced. He himself had held a balloon in his childhood, dreaming of flying, but he quickly pushed the thought away, considering it a weakness. He had grown up believing that dreams were a waste of time, and that only hard work and intelligence brought power. Still, there was something uncomfortable about seeing that man smiling genuinely at strangers. The billionaire couldn't remember the last time he had truly smiled. A feeling of incompleteness struck him, but he quickly took refuge in the cynicism that always accompanied him. He watched more closely. The vendor was simple, probably poor, but he radiated a strange joy. His little granddaughter laughed with innocence, as if each balloon was the most precious thing in the world. The billionaire shook his head, judging them to be naive.
Yet the scene seemed determined to provoke him. The more he tried to pull away from the sight, the more something inside called him closer. It was as if fate had somehow arranged this meeting. He took a deep breath, trying to ignore the restlessness growing in his chest. But the inevitable was about to happen. His steps were leading him directly into the vendor's path, and this simple collision of two worlds would change everything from that point on. The billionaire walked hurriedly, his gaze distant, lost in his own thoughts. He wasn't paying attention to his surroundings, not to the children running around, nor to the couple strolling peacefully. His body moved forward like a machine without direction, and destiny seemed to want to play a trick on him. With every step, the tension on his face revealed a mind saturated with arrogance and haste. It was in this moment of carelessness that it all happened. Without realizing it, he bumped hard into the balloon seller's basket. The impact caused several strings to come loose, and suddenly dozens of colorful balloons began rising quickly into the sky. The children, once cheerful, now gasped in astonishment as they watched the colors disappear into the heights. The vendor tried to run after the balloons, but it was impossible to catch them. He held tightly to the ones that remained, desperation in his eyes. Each lost balloon represented a part of his daily income, and the blow was too painful to ignore. His granddaughter watched him, distressed, as if she had lost a piece of her own joy. The billionaire, for his part, stopped and looked at the scene, but showed neither guilt nor compassion. His eyes just followed the balloons rising into the sky, as if it were merely an irrelevant inconvenience. He took a deep breath, adjusted his suit, and looked coldly at the humble man. The silence that fell seemed to weigh heavily in the air. The little girl, still not fully grasping the gravity of what had happened, held her grandfather's hand and asked in a whisper if they could get the balloons back. The old man just sighed, trying not to show his sadness in front of her, but the pain in his eyes revealed that this loss was greater than she could imagine. The passerbys who witnessed the scene murmured among themselves. Some stared at the billionaire with indignation, others just shook their heads in disapproval. To everyone, it was clear that the least expected was an apology, but the rich man's pride prevented him from even considering it. He put his hand in his pocket, took out a bill, and let it fall to the ground in front of the vendor. His eyes conveyed a silent contempt, as if money could erase the damage he had caused. It was the gesture of someone who believed everything in life had a price, and that paying it was enough to move on without a guilty conscience. The vendor, frozen, did not bend down to pick up the money. His dignity was worth more than any bill thrown down with arrogance. His granddaughter watched the scene, with a mix of confusion and courage growing in her small heart. Something was too wrong to be ignored. The billionaire turned, ready to move on, convinced he had settled the matter. But fate, once again, would not let him escape so easily. The little girl, with her bright, innocent eyes, still had something to say, and her words would change everything.
The quiet of the park was broken by the little girl's soft voice. With steady steps, she walked over to the fallen bill on the ground. Her eyes looked at the billionaire without fear, as if her childlike purity gave her a strength greater than any wealth. The onlookers watched, curious, unable to imagine what was about to happen. She bent down, picked up the money, and held it gently between her fingers. For a moment, it seemed she would hand it to her grandfather, but then she took 2 steps forward and extended her hand to the man in the suit. The gesture surprised everyone, including the billionaire, who raised his eyebrows, annoyed by her boldness. "Mister, you can buy all the balloons in the world," she said, her tone innocent but firm. "But you can't bring my grandpa's back." The silence that followed was almost palpable. The words landed like a direct blow to the heart of everyone who heard them. The crowd held its breath. The girl then pointed to the sky, where the balloons were now just small colored dots. "Now he'll have to explain to the stars why they ran away," she finished, with the sincerity of someone who was just telling the truth. Her gaze seemed to cut through the billionaire's pride and touch a forgotten place inside him. The successful man stood motionless, feeling something strange within himself. It was as if the child's words were tearing off a mask he had worn for years. For a brief instant, he remembered himself as a small boy, looking at the sky and dreaming of flying. The memory hit him with force, almost like a punch. The vendor, moved, discreetly wiped away a tear. He never expected his granddaughter to have such courage and wisdom to confront someone so powerful. For him, that moment was already a victory, because it showed that despite all the hardships, there was still dignity and hope in the world. The eyes of everyone present turned to the billionaire, waiting for a reaction. Some believed he would apologize, others that he would simply ignore it. But inside him, a silent battle had begun. His pride against a dormant memory of a heart that had once dreamed. The little girl remained standing, firm, holding the money without handing it over. There was no arrogance in her gesture, just a simple truth he couldn't refute. She represented a purity that money could never buy, and it disarmed him in a way he couldn't understand. The billionaire, accustomed to dominating boardrooms, now felt fragile in front of a child. His throat went dry, and for a moment he couldn't utter a single word. The silence said more than any speech ever could. At that moment, something inside him began to shift, even if slowly. He didn't know it, but life had just planted a seed in his heart, a seed that would soon sprout and change the course of his story forever. The little girl's eyes still watched the billionaire with determination, the paper bill trembling slightly in her small hand. She didn't seem intimidated by the imposing figure before her. On the contrary, it was as if she held the conviction that the truth needed to be spoken, even if it came from a child. The entire park waited in silence for the outcome of the scene. The billionaire took a deep breath, trying to regain control. His rational mind insisted on dismissing the gesture, labeling it as childish, but the echo of the girl's words remained within him, like a wound that wouldn't heal. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, unable to dominate a situation. The girl walked over to her grandfather and handed him the money. He hesitated before accepting it. It wasn't about the amount, but what it represented. He looked into his granddaughter's eyes and, in silence, understood the message. Money wasn't the solution. It was the respect and dignity that had been denied. The children who were watching began to laugh softly, not out of malice, but from the feeling that the truth had been spoken. The adults murmured, some smiling discreetly, others visibly moved. The atmosphere was shifting into something the billionaire couldn't control. His status in that place was worthless in the face of the girl's purity. He took a step back, uncomfortable. Every gaze seemed to judge him, but what bothered him most was the child's own gaze. There was a clarity in it that disarmed him. That simple gesture had broken through years of cynicism and arrogance. His silence spoke louder than any words. The vendor held his granddaughter's hand, proud of her courage. Even though he knew the risks of provoking someone so powerful, he also understood that the girl's innocence was untouchable. Her words had been a ray of light in the darkness of a life marked by inequality. The billionaire turned, trying to walk away, but something seemed to root his feet to the ground, as if he couldn't simply leave. It was as if the girl's sentence had turned into invisible chains, forcing him to face what he had tried to forget for so long, his own humanity. As he wrestled with himself, the girl smiled again, this time at her grandfather. For her, the matter was settled. The truth had been told, and that was enough. What the rich man would do next didn't matter. She had already fulfilled her role with the simplicity of a child. In silence, the billionaire felt smaller than ever. He was a titan of business, accustomed to deciding the fate of entire companies, yet now defeated by a single sentence. His chest burned as if he had lost something precious on his way to this point, something he had, perhaps, never even realized was missing. The scene slowly dissolved, with the vendor returning to his work and the children running through the park once more. But inside the billionaire's heart, nothing was normal. A seed had been planted, and it would grow. He didn't yet know how, but that little girl had changed his life forever.
The billionaire walked out of the park, but with each step, he felt as if he were carrying an unbearable weight. The girl's words echoed like a refrain in his mind. "You can buy all the balloons in the world, but you can't bring my grandpa's back." It was impossible to ignore that simple truth. He tried to convince himself it was just an irrelevant scene, something he would soon forget. Yet the memory of the balloons rising into the sky, like dreams slipping through his fingers, tormented him. No matter how much he wanted to bury the incident, the image wouldn't leave his head. It was like a mirror of what he had become. He sat down on a bench off to the side, still within the park, but away from everyone's gaze. There, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. The silence around him contrasted with the noise inside. For the first time in a long time, he couldn't use money, intelligence, or power to control the situation. He was helpless against himself. Memories of his childhood began to surface, and he couldn't stop them. He saw himself as a boy running with a balloon in his hand, looking at the sky and believing anything was possible. His heart beat fast in that memory, but not from anxiety, but from hope, something he hadn't felt in decades. The comparison with his present life was painful. The boy who dreamed of flying had become a man who only knew how to accumulate wealth and control people. Where had he gotten lost? When exactly had he traded his own humanity for status? These questions ate away at him. As he reflected, he watched from a distance as the vendor and his granddaughter laughed about something simple, as if life were a gift. The contrast was cruel. He owned mansions, cars, and power, but he didn't have what they had, the lightness of being at peace with oneself. The feeling of emptiness deepened. The billionaire clenched his fists, annoyed by his own weakness. He hated feeling vulnerable. But at the same time, there was something liberating about that pain. It was as if he had finally found a crack in his armor of arrogance, a small crack, but enough to let the light in. The wind blew softly, rustling the trees and reminding him of the lost balloons. He closed his eyes, trying to imagine if it was still possible to recover that dreamy boy he had once been. The answer didn't come immediately, but the desire was beginning to awaken within him.
When he opened his eyes, he noticed the girl was still playing with her grandfather, laughing as if the world was simple and beautiful. That image etched itself into his mind as a reminder that perhaps there was still time to change. Maybe it was possible to find his way back.
With a heavy yet changed heart, the billionaire left the park in silence. He couldn't explain it, but he carried the certainty that his life couldn't continue the same way. The little girl had planted something that would grow, even against his will, and he was about to discover just how far it would take him. Lying in his bed that night, the billionaire couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the balloons rising into the sky, like fragments of a forgotten past. The silence of his luxurious bedroom was suffocating, and for the first time, he wished he were somewhere else, anywhere but there. Memories of his childhood came rushing back. He saw himself running in an open field, laughing without a care, a red balloon tied to his hand. He felt the wind on his face and believed with all his heart that he could fly if he just held on tight. The sky was an infinite promise, and nothing seemed impossible. He also remembered his mother, smiling as she watched him play. She used to tell him that dreaming was what made life worthwhile. Those words, once so full of meaning, had gotten lost during his adult life. He had replaced dreams with goals and innocence with the weight of ambition. The billionaire felt a tightness in his chest. He had forgotten the boy who believed in balloons and had become just the man who believed in numbers. The memory brought silent tears, something he hadn't allowed himself in a very long time. The pain was intense, yet it also felt like a calling. He tossed and turned in bed, restless, as if trying to escape from himself. But the images persisted: colorful balloons, laughter, the smell of the field, and the feeling of freedom. The contrast with his present was so cruel it made him feel ashamed. He had everything, but had lost what truly mattered. The clock showed the late hours, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, his mind revisited every choice that had pulled him away from his true self. The signed contracts, the power struggles, the humiliations he had self-caused. It all seemed meaningless when faced with the purity of a simple memory. For a moment, he wished he could turn back time. He wanted to feel the sun's warmth on his skin, the innocence of laughter, and the lightness of believing in dreams once more. But time doesn't move backward. Only one question echoed in his mind now. Was it possible to find that boy inside himself again? He got up and walked to the window. Outside, the city slept, illuminated by artificial lights. But high above it all were the stars, the same ones he had once gazed at while imagining that balloons could reach them. and he remembered the girl's words, "Grandpa will have to explain to the stars." That sentence felt like an invitation, almost a command. Perhaps he too had to give an explanation to the stars, not about the balloons, but about the dreams he had abandoned. The weight of this reflection made him sigh deeply, as if he were on the verge of a decision. He lay down again, still unable to rest. But now there was something different inside him, a new restlessness, almost like a spark. It was the beginning of a change he didn't yet understand, but one that was already pulling him away from the arrogance that had defined him for so many years.
The next day, the billionaire woke up exhausted, but determined to bury the emotions from the previous night. He dressed in his finest suit, as if the armor of success could protect him from the memories. He got into his luxury car and headed to another meeting. He needed to prove to himself that nothing had changed. During the meeting, however, he felt strange. The charts, numbers, and projections that usually gave him a sense of control now seemed lifeless. The executives' voices sounded muffled, as if coming from far away. He could barely pay attention, as images of the colorful balloons kept invading his mind. He tried to act normal, but his distracted expression didn't go unnoticed. One of the partners questioned him sharply, and he reacted with his usual arrogance. But the aggression sounded forced. Deep down, he knew it wasn't the frustration from the meeting that bothered him, but the weight of the memory. When he left the office, the restlessness came back even stronger. His pride told him he should ignore it, that it was just a passing weakness, but his heart kept recalling the girl's gaze, pure and disarming. It was as if she had seen something inside him that even he no longer recognized. He walked the streets with no destination, wanting to escape the corporate world, even if just for a little while. The expensive store windows and tall buildings no longer gave him satisfaction. Everything felt empty, as if he were surrounded by the ghosts of achievements that meant nothing. As he passed by a square, he saw a child running with a blue balloon. The child's spontaneous laughter felt like a direct hit. His chest tightened again, and a bitter feeling of regret washed over him. How had he allowed his life to drift so far from that? Anger then surfaced as a defense mechanism. He clenched his fists and repeated to himself that he shouldn't give in to weakness. Pride was what kept him on top. Pride was what made him respected. But deep down, he was starting to realize that this same pride was his prison. His steps led him back to the park, even against his will. It was as if something invisible was pulling him there. He stood at a distance, watching the vendor and his granddaughter again. They were laughing with each other, even with so little. The scene, in its simplicity, completely disarmed him. The billionaire felt a mix of envy and admiration. Envy for that peace he didn't possess, and admiration for the dignity that persisted despite hardship. Shame washed over him once again. He, who had everything, felt smaller than those who had almost nothing. His pride still held him back from acting, but the seed was already sprouting. He knew he couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face the truth. And that truth was right there before his eyes, in the form of a simple man and a little girl who carried more wisdom than he had ever possessed. The following days were filled with pure restlessness. The billionaire tried to focus on business, but nothing satisfied him. Meetings, contracts, and decisions that once gave him a sense of power now felt empty. In every moment of silence, the echo of the girl's voice returned, forcing him to confront truths he had always avoided. Without realizing it, his car took him back to the park. It wasn't his intention, but something inside him was pushing him there.
He parked at a distance and walked slowly among the trees, trying to go unnoticed. His heart raced as if he were about to face a crucial meeting, but this time with himself. From afar, he spotted the vendor and his granddaughter. The scene was simple, yet powerful. They laughed together as they sold balloons, as if the whole world could be contained in that small act of love. The billionaire stood motionless, watching in silence, unable to look away. He felt a strange mix of shame and fascination. Shame for having been so arrogant, and fascination at witnessing something so pure. It was as if the park were a parallel world, immune to the greed and pride that ruled his life. Each of the girl's smiles felt like a precise arrow to his chest. As he watched, he noticed he wasn't the only one. People passed by and greeted the vendor with affection, some buying balloons just to show support. The billionaire felt like an intruder. In that place, wealth and power meant nothing. There, it was kindness that held value. His gaze found the balloons rising into the sky again, purchased by smiling families. Each one that flew away seemed to carry a piece of a forgotten memory. The billionaire closed his eyes, fighting the emotion. He didn't want to be affected, but he was losing the battle. A part of him told him to leave and never come back, but another part, growing stronger each day, pushed him to stay. It was as if that park had become a mirror reflecting everything he had lost on his life's journey. He stood there for a long time, without the courage to approach. He watched the vendor's gestures, his care for his granddaughter, and wondered what it would be like to have that kind of peace. He felt envy again, but also hope that maybe it was still possible to change. Before leaving, he took one last look at the girl. She was holding a red balloon tightly and laughing, unaware that she was effortlessly transforming the heart of a powerful man. He left the park, but he knew he would return. It was no longer a choice, but a necessity. In his car, driving back to the city, the billionaire reflected on his life. He had reached the top, but now he realized the top was a lonely place. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to learn to look downward, where simplicity flourished.
The next day, the billionaire made a decision he never thought he would. He would return to the park, but this time, not just to watch. Something inside him demanded action, a first step to break free from the pride that had imprisoned him. He dressed simply, without his impeccable suit, trying to seem less distant. When he arrived, the park was as lively as before. Children were running, couples were strolling, and the balloon vendor was continuing his work with the same serenity. The billionaire approached slowly, feeling his heart race. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so nervous about something so simple. The vendor recognized him immediately. His gaze was firm, but held no resentment, only wariness. His granddaughter, however, squinted curiously, unafraid. She still remembered the moment her words had silenced this man, and now she saw him returning, changed. At first, without saying a word, the billionaire opened his wallet and bought every single balloon in the basket. The vendor's eyes widened in surprise. People nearby began to murmur, trying to understand what was happening. But this wasn't a show of wealth. For the first time, the billionaire wasn't buying to display power, but to listen. "I want to hear your story," he finally said, his voice firm but carrying something new, humility. The vendor stayed silent for a few seconds, trying to understand what this meant. The girl held her grandfather's hand, watching curiously every gesture of this man who once seemed untouchable. The billionaire sat on a nearby bench and waited. There was no hurry, no arrogance, just the feeling that he needed to be there. The vendor, hesitant, began to speak about his life. He told him about losing his daughter and taking in his granddaughter, and how the balloons became his way of making a living while also spreading joy. With every word, the billionaire felt the weight of their simple reality. There were no strategies, numbers, or business deals in this story, just love, pain, and hope. It was so far removed from his own life that it felt like another universe. The girl, smiling, filled in details as if she were the guardian of her grandfather's memories. When the vendor finished, silence fell for a few moments. The billionaire took a deep breath, staring at the ground. He didn't know exactly what to say, but something inside him had already shifted. For the first time, he felt small in front of a simple man, and not because of wealth or power. "I'm sorry," he murmured at last, his voice soft and almost trembling. The vendor looked up surprised. It wasn't just a formal apology. It was something that came from within, filled with genuine regret. The granddaughter smiled, as if she had known this moment would come.
The curious glances from people around them increased, but this time the billionaire didn't care. His public image meant nothing in that moment. What mattered was the raw, honest truth that was finally being revealed in his life. He let out a nervous, almost childlike laugh and said he couldn't remember the last time he had apologized to anyone. The vendor simply nodded, understanding that the gesture itself was already a huge step. The girl, without any formality, took the billionaire's hand, as if to seal the peace between them. It was in that simple touch that he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: humanity. That tiny hand conveyed trust, forgiveness, and innocence, everything he had lost along the way and now wished to find again. The billionaire looked at the balloons he had bought, still held by their strings. He felt a strange urge to release a few, like he did when he was a child. But he held back, promising himself he would do something bigger. This wouldn't end here. In a voice that was firmer yet still humble, he announced that he had an idea that could change not just the lives of the vendor and his granddaughter, but his own as well. And in that instant, their destinies began to transform for good. The billionaire asked to speak with the vendor in private. They sat together on a park bench while the girl played nearby, still keeping a watchful eye. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to remove the armor he had always worn before the world. "I'm not who I appear to be," he began, staring intently at the ground. "People see me as a successful man, someone who has achieved everything. But the truth is, on the inside, I've lost what was most important. I can't even remember what it feels like to dream anymore." The vendor listened in silence, without interrupting. He knew how to recognize when someone needed to talk, and the billionaire in that moment was just a man seeking redemption. The sincerity of his words was a stark contrast to the arrogance of days past. He continued, confessing how wealth had turned him into someone cold, incapable of feeling real joy. He told him about the failed meeting, the constant frustration, and how the little girl's words had struck him like lightning. Tears threatened to well up, but he didn't hold them back. For the first time, he didn't care about appearing fragile. Moved, the vendor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well, life has a way of doing that, son. Sometimes you have to fall down to remember how valuable it is to get back up." The simple words touched the billionaire's heart deeply. He felt he was in the presence of someone who knew far more about life than he had ever learned.
The little girl approached, holding a red balloon. "This is for you," she said, handing it to the billionaire with an innocent smile. He took the balloon with trembling hands, as if it were the most precious object in the world. That gesture seemed to symbolize a new beginning. The billionaire closed his eyes, remembering the boy he once was. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe there was still time to recover his true self. That balloon was like a bridge between a forgotten past and a future that could now be different. He turned to the vendor and said, his voice firm, "I want to help you, not as a way to repay a debt, but as a chance to find what I've lost. I want to use what I know to transform your life, just as you are transforming mine." The vendor stayed silent, surprised, unsure if he should accept right away. He was used to getting by with very little, and the idea of change seemed too distant. But the sincerity in the billionaire's eyes was undeniable. He wasn't there as a rich man, but as someone seeking redemption. His granddaughter, with her childlike purity, broke the silence. "If you really want to help, then let's dream together." And so, in that simple park, a pact was born. One that would change not only their lives, but also the destiny of a man who had learned that wealth without dreams is just emptiness. In the days that followed, the billionaire could think of nothing else but the promise he had made in the park. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't occupied with numbers or corporate goals, but with the possibility of creating something with soul. He felt that helping the balloon vendor would, in some way, be helping himself. They met again in the park on a quiet afternoon. The billionaire brought a notebook, which seemed out of place in the simple setting. He opened it on the bench and began showing ideas for how they could expand the small balloon business using the internet as a bridge to reach more people. He spoke with an unusual enthusiasm, almost like a boy presenting a new invention. He described an online store, promotional campaigns, and even ways to turn the balloons into symbols of hope, sending them with personalized messages. It was more than a business, it was a movement of dreams. The vendor listened, astonished, paying close attention. He had never imagined anything so grand. To him, the balloons had always been a way to get by and spread joy locally. But now, faced with this proposal, he realized his story could reach places he would never visit. The little girl was thrilled with each new idea. Her eyes shone at the possibility that her grandfather's balloons could reach other children in other cities. To her, it was like giving wings to their dreams. The billionaire smiled, seeing her excitement, feeling like he was part of something bigger. He explained that this wasn't about charity, but partnership. He wanted the vendor to keep the heart of what he did while he provided the tools to expand. "I don't want to erase your story. I want to help it reach more hearts." Those words touched the old man deeply. For a moment, the vendor hesitated. He was afraid all that modernity might steal the simplicity that gave his work meaning. But the billionaire's gaze showed no financial interest, only a desire for personal transformation. That convinced him to give it a chance. They made an agreement right then and there, without contracts or signatures, just with a sincere handshake. The billionaire felt that this gesture was worth more than any multi-million-dollar deal he had ever made. The vendor, in turn, realized something rare was happening. A powerful man wanted to use his influence for good. The little girl, bouncing with excitement, said she already had a name for the project: Balloons for the Sky. The billionaire laughed, charmed, and immediately wrote down the idea. It was simple, but it carried the essence of everything they were trying to build. The first step had been taken. Now more than ever, the billionaire knew he would have to face obstacles, not just external ones, but internal ones as well. Change was underway,
But the world around him wouldn't accept this transformation easily. News that the billionaire was involved in a balloon project soon reached his partners. The reaction was immediate and negative. In a heated meeting, they questioned whether he had lost his mind. To them, it was a waste of time and a risk to his image as a ruthless leader. "You're risking your reputation on a childish fantasy," one investor accused. Another was even harsher. "The market doesn't forgive sentimentality. If you keep this up, you'll lose credibility." The words cut deep, but the billionaire held his gaze steady. Deep down, he knew this resistance was inevitable. The business world ran on greed and cold calculation, exactly what he was now trying to move away from. The battle wouldn't just be against his partners, but against the old version of himself that still haunted him. Despite this, a shadow of doubt crept in. Was he really prepared to face everyone for the sake of something so simple? What if this was just a passing illusion? The fear of failure paralyzed him for a few moments. That night, he returned to the park looking for answers. He found the vendor and his granddaughter, who welcomed him with a smile. The girl ran up to him and asked, "Have we told the stars yet?" The purity of the question made the weight in his chest dissolve. Here was the reason his partners would never understand. The billionaire explained the situation, telling them about the criticism and the threats of losing financial support. The vendor, with his usual serenity, replied, "People will always doubt you when you decide to follow your heart. But the heart is the only business that never operates at a loss." The words stayed etched in his mind.
The granddaughter, laughing, said she didn't care about the men in suits. For her, what mattered was that the balloons reached the stars and that every child had the chance to dream. That innocence strengthened him more than any corporate advice ever could. He decided then that he would move forward, even if it meant facing losses. For the first time, he wasn't acting out of ambition, but out of purpose, and it gave him a strength he never knew he had. Still, deep down, the fear remained. What would happen if he failed? Was he willing to give up his position of power to pursue something so intangible? These questions haunted him, but now there was a difference. He was no longer walking this path alone. As he left the park that night, he looked up at the starry sky and smiled. He realized that somehow he had already begun giving his own explanations to the stars, and for the first time, he felt no shame for the person he was becoming. The Balloons for the Sky project started modestly, with a few online sales organized by the billionaire. However, the idea quickly gained momentum. People from various cities began buying personalized balloons to send messages of hope, love, and farewell. The simple act of releasing a balloon became a powerful symbol. Social media began filling with photos and videos of families releasing balloons in honor of loved ones or to celebrate dreams. The initiative went viral, even catching the attention of news outlets. The billionaire, once seen as arrogant and cold, began being portrayed as someone seeking redemption. The vendor could hardly believe what was happening. His small trade, which once barely paid the bills, was now taking on an unexpected scale. More than the money, he felt valued. His story and his simplicity were inspiring people he would never meet. His granddaughter became the project's ambassador, her innocence captivating everyone. In a video recorded by the billionaire, she said, "Every balloon carries a dream to the sky, and when the stars look down at them, they smile back at us." The phrase went viral, moving millions of people. Meanwhile, the billionaire's partners grew even more irritated. Some tried to convince him to give it up, claiming he was ruining his image in the business world. But his response was firm. "I won't turn back. For the first time, I'm doing something that makes me feel human." It was a declaration that sealed his choice. The project began attracting volunteers. Schools, communities, and even hospitals started organizing collective events, releasing balloons as a way to spread hope. The emotional impact far surpassed any financial profit. The billionaire realized that, for the first time, his intelligence and resources were being used for something truly meaningful. He himself participated in a public event, releasing a red balloon alongside the vendor's granddaughter. The moment was captured by hundreds of cameras, but for him, the publicity didn't matter. All that mattered was feeling connected once again to the boy who had once dreamed of flying.
The critical glances were still there, but they no longer shook him. Public support was growing, and people saw him not just as a rich man, but as a human being willing to change. Arrogance was giving way to something far greater: empathy. The vendor, deeply moved, thanked the billionaire in a simple interview, saying, "He helped me sell balloons, but in truth, he's helping humanity dream again." The phrase resonated powerfully, becoming a motto for the entire project. Deep down, the billionaire knew he hadn't just changed the lives of the vendor and his granddaughter. He had changed himself, and in doing so, he had rekindled the flame in many other hearts that also needed to remember how to dream. Months passed, and the project solidified into a worldwide movement. People in different countries began to join in, releasing balloons as symbols of hope and solidarity. The billionaire, once obsessed with profit and power, now found satisfaction in seeing smiles multiply. On a clear morning, he returned to the very park where it all began. The vendor was there, as always, but now with a more organized stall, supported by the project's resources. His granddaughter was running around, laughing with other children. The scene felt familiar, yet completely transformed. The billionaire approached and greeted the vendor with a hug. There were no more barriers between them, only respect and friendship. The girl handed him a red balloon, the same symbol of his transformation. "This is so you never forget who you really are," she said, smiling. He held the balloon tightly, overcome with emotion. He no longer needed billion-dollar companies to feel fulfilled. True wealth was right there, in the simplicity of a gesture, the innocent sparkle in a child's eyes, the love that spread without asking for anything in return. The vendor thanked him for the change the project had brought. He said he could now support his granddaughter with dignity, but above all, he was proud to see his story inspiring the world. The billionaire humbly replied, "Truthfully, you're the one who saved me." As they talked, several people around them released balloons, each carrying a special message. The sky filled with colors, like a canvas painted by hope. The billionaire looked up and felt a lightness in his heart, something he hadn't experienced since childhood. For a moment, he closed his eyes and imagined his mother smiling, telling him that dreaming was what gave life meaning. He felt connected to the stars, as if he had finally made peace with the boy he had forgotten. The emptiness inside him was gone. The granddaughter, with her innocent manner, pointed to the sky and said, "See, the stars are smiling." He laughed, moved, and replied, "Yes, they are, and this time I am too." The park, full of life, had become a symbol of transformation. It was no longer just a place where balloons were sold, but the stage for a change that had touched thousands of people. All because of one child's courage to speak the truth. The billionaire knew his journey was just beginning. There was still much to do, many lives to touch, but now he walked with a real purpose, unafraid to be vulnerable. For the first time,
he felt truly rich. And as he released his red balloon into the sky, he understood that the greatest fortune anyone can possess is the ability to dream and to share those dreams with the world.